Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a truly fascinating and honestly pretty crucial secret about how society shapes every single one of us. We're going to unpack these invisible boxes that people get squeezed into right from childhood. And more importantly, we're looking at the very real, often hidden consequences that explode to the surface when people try to break out of them, or when they're forced to stay trapped inside.
Okay, let's dive into this. Think back to a school playground. You know the type, right? Usually the kid who is just relentlessly pushing everyone else around, the one acting the absolute most aggressive, is secretly the one who is the most insecure or frightened. They're basically putting on this massive, loud show just to make sure nobody looks too closely at their own weaknesses. Well, researchers have found that this exact same playground dynamic happens with grown adults. It just happens on a much larger scale, especially when we look at how society tells us we're supposed to act.
To really wrap our heads around this, we need to talk about what we'll call the tough guy box. From the time they are little kids, society essentially hands young boys this metaphorical box. It's built out of incredibly strict, rigid rules about what it actually means to be a real man. The message is clear. To be seen as strong, to be respected, you have to fit perfectly inside this box, no matter how uncomfortable or suffocating it might be. Now, our sources point out that this box stems from a historical system known as patriarchy. In the simplest terms, this is a historical and cultural setup where men make the rules at the top. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. While it gave men the power, it also forced literally everyone into these super strict roles that nobody actually asked for. Men were told they had to be the boss, and women were told to just stay quiet and follow along.
Inside that tough guy box, the rules are just exhausting. I mean, you have to act unbelievably tough 24/7. No crying at sad movies, definitely no showing fear, and absolutely, under no circumstances, doing anything society labels as girly. If you break even one rule, you risk being laughed at or bullied. It is quite literally an impossible standard, and it leaves a lot of young men feeling completely, utterly trapped.
So what exactly happens when a young man realizes he just doesn't fit in that box? Well, imagine a man who is gay, but who has been told his entire life that being gay completely breaks the rules of the tough guy box. Terrified of being bullied or rejected or having his manhood questioned, he decides to hide. He essentially crafts this fake version of himself. It's a protective mask that he wears every single day, trying to convince the world, and honestly, sometimes even himself, that he fits perfectly inside that box.
You can actually think of this a lot like a shaken soda can. When you force someone to carry around a massive secret about who they truly are, and you force them to constantly, obsessively monitor their own behavior to keep that mask from slipping, well, immense emotional pressure builds up. You've got fear, anxiety, and frustration just bubbling right beneath the surface. And exactly like a shaken soda can, eventually all that pressure just has to explode outward. So the crucial point is that psychologists actually have a specific name for this explosion. It's called reaction formation. It's what happens when a person loudly, aggressively attacks a trait in someone else, simply because they are secretly terrified that they have that exact same trait hidden inside themselves. The intense pressure of that shaken soda can explodes outward as loud, outward anger. For a man hiding the fact that he's gay, this often manifests as extreme, super loud hostility toward out and proud gay people. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that this isn't just some abstract theory. It has literally been measured in a lab. Take a look at this data from a famous 1996 study by Adams, Wright, and Lohr. The researchers hooked up physical sensors to two groups of men, one group who acted very anti-gay and another group who didn't. They measured their bodily reactions while watching different videos, and the results were absolutely startling. The men who acted the loudest and most hostile toward gay people were actually the only ones who secretly showed significant physical arousal to the videos of gay men. The loudest bullies were, quite literally, hiding their own hidden reactions.
Okay, so we can clearly see how this secret fear causes some men to attack gay people. But how on earth does this connect to women? Why does a man hiding who he really is often become highly aggressive or unfair toward women? This is where the story gets incredibly fascinating, and to understand it, we have to go right back to the rules of that societal box.
Let's move to the next slide and see how this builds step by step. Remember, the absolute golden rule of the tough guy box is to reject anything feminine. If a man secretly fears he might be gay, the box tells him that makes him like a woman, which society, wrongly but loudly, calls weak. Terrified of being seen as weak, he overcompensates. He distances himself as far as humanly possible from anything female.
This secret fear twists into a deep resentment and anger toward women, which we call misogyny, all simply to prove to the world just how tough and manly he really is.
To make this a bit easier to grasp, we can look at real historical figures who scholars and biographers suggest struggled immensely with wearing this exact type of mask. Because, society's pressure doesn't just fall on everyday people, it heavily impacts famous poets, leaders, activists, you name it. So let's neutrally look at how the struggle between a hidden identity and the fear of the feminine played out in two very different historical figures.
First up, let's look at the famous poet T.S. Eliot. Biographers have noted that Eliot likely spent his life hiding his homosexuality. And because he was so utterly terrified of being seen as feminine, he took that hidden fear and basically weaponized it into anger. If you read his famous poem, The Wasteland, you'll see he wrote some incredibly dark, detestable, and ugly portrayals of women. His secret fear essentially turned into outward bullying on the page.
We see a different but somewhat related struggle in the early life of American activist Malcolm X. According to biographer Bruce Perry's findings, a young Malcolm lacked strong male role models and was deeply afraid of the controlling women in his family. Because of this intense fear of women, he avoided depending on them entirely and instead sought out hidden encounters with men to find release. It was this tragic, complex mix of being afraid of women while hiding his own truth at the exact same time.
The thing is, when someone is spending all their energy hiding behind a fake mask, seeing someone else live freely is absolutely terrifying. The sources describe this as the mirror effect. When out and proud individuals live authentically, they accidentally hold up a giant mirror to the people who are still hiding inside the box. The person wearing the mask sees exactly what they are too afraid to be themselves, and that is exactly why they react with such intense hostility. And this brilliantly illustrates a point made by the legendary author James Baldwin. He summed this up so perfectly. He noticed that all these rigid labels we constantly fight over, they are actually modern inventions. Human nature is incredibly fluid and complex. These strict barriers, the impossible boxes, the intense rules about what makes someone tough or weak, they aren't natural laws like gravity. They are just illusions created by society.
So why does all of this actually matter to you and me? Well, understanding the root of this anger really helps us see the world a lot more clearly. When we see a man acting like a bully or display intense misogyny or homophobia, we can recognize that it very often stems from a place of deep fear and a desperate need to fit into an impossible box. It shows us that the only real way to stop the cycle of bullying and anger is to build a society where people feel safe enough to finally take off their masks and just be themselves.
Ultimately, keeping up a fake mask requires an unbelievable amount of energy, and it inevitably hurts both the person wearing it and the people around them. True toughness, it isn't about pushing down who you are or attacking women to prove your strength. It's about honesty. If the absolute strongest and bravest thing a person can do is simply be exactly who they are, isn't it about time we stopped forcing people into these destructive boxes? I want you to think about that the next time you see someone trying to act just a little too tough. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.